Financial independence is not a subjective feeling. It is a rigid mathematical coordinate where labor becomes entirely optional. This specific threshold is known as the wealth crossover point, a moment where the output of capital finally outruns the demands of a lifestyle. Most working professionals spend 40 years trading hours for dollars, unaware that the rules of wealth change once a portfolio reaches a certain critical mass. Understanding this mechanism is the difference between perpetual employment and true structural freedom in the modern economy. Over the next few minutes, this analysis will break down the precise formulas used by the top 1% to identify their exit dates. From the 4% rule to the impact of inflationary drag, the data reveals a clear path to the crossover point. The wealth crossover point is defined as the moment when an individual's net passive investment income consistently exceeds their total annual cost of living. For a household with annual expenses totaling $80,000, reaching this milestone requires a specific capital base to sustain that outflow indefinitely. Financial historians often point to the Trinity study, which suggests a 4% safe withdrawal rate as a benchmark for portfolio longevity. Under this model, a $2 million portfolio generates exactly $80,000 in annual income, theoretically allowing the principal to remain intact through various market cycles. However, calculating the crossover point requires more than just a single number. It requires a deep audit of recurring liabilities. The IRS reports that the average American household spends significantly on housing, transportation, and healthcare, all of which must be covered by dividends, interest, or capital gains. If a portfolio yields a conservative 5% annually through a mix of equities and fixed income, the math becomes a simple division problem. To find the crossover target, one simply divides their annual expenses by their expected rate of return to reveal the necessary nest egg size. Many people find that reducing their annual burn rate by just 10% can bring their crossover point years closer. This illustrates that the crossover point is a moving target influenced equally by the size of the engine and the weight of the vehicle. But here's where it gets interesting when we look at the speed of the climb. The journey toward the crossover point is rarely linear. It is back-heavy due to the nature of compound interest. In the early stages, the majority of wealth growth comes from active contributions, essentially the physical labor of the individual saving a portion of their salary. Data suggests that for the first 10 years of an investment journey, personal savings rates matter more than investment returns. A person saving 15% of $100,000 income will initially outpace a person with a small portfolio, seeing 10% growth. But as the portfolio approaches the mid-six-figure range, a phenomenon known as critical velocity occurs. At this stage, a 7% annual return on a $500,000 portfolio yields $35,000, often rivaling the actual amount the individual can contribute from their paycheck. The rule of 72 is a common mental shortcut used by analysts to estimate how quickly an asset base will double. By dividing 72 by the expected annual rate of return, one can see that at 8%, wealth doubles every 9 years regardless of additional labor. This exponential curve means the final 20% of the journey to the crossover point often happens in a fraction of the time it took to complete the first 20%. The momentum of capital eventually becomes an unstoppable force that dwarfs the human capacity for work. The data tells a different story, however, when we account for the hidden variables that threaten to push the crossover point further into the future. It is not enough to simply reach the number. One must also protect it from erosion. The most significant threat to a permanent wealth crossover is the silent erosion of purchasing power known as inflation. If the cost of goods rises at an average of 3% annually, a fixed passive income that feels comfortable today will be insufficient in a decade. Investors must distinguish between nominal returns and real returns. If a brokerage account grows by 8% in a year where inflation is 4%, the real growth in purchasing power is only 4%, effectively doubling the time required to reach the crossover point. Taxation represents the second major friction point in the crossover equation. Depending on the jurisdiction, capital gains and dividend taxes can claim 15 to 20% of investment income, meaning the gross crossover point is not the same as the net crossover point. Smart asset location. Utilizing tax-advantaged accounts like the 401k or Roth IRA can mitigate this drag. High net worth individuals often prioritize these structures to ensure that every dollar of passive income generated is a dollar they actually get to keep. Furthermore, lifestyle creep often acts as a counterforce to asset growth. As income rises, the tendency to increase expenses can keep the crossover point perpetually out of reach, a cycle many economists refer to as the hedonic treadmill. But once the math accounts for taxes, inflation, and expenses, the transition from accumulation to preservation becomes the final hurdle. The data shows that the strategy used to build wealth is rarely the same as the one used to maintain it through the crossover. Crossing the threshold changes the fundamental risk profile of a portfolio. During the accumulation phase, market volatility is often a friend, allowing investors to buy assets at lower prices. However, during the crossover phase, volatility becomes a sequence of returns risk. A significant market downturn in the first 3 years after reaching the crossover point can deplete a portfolio faster than it can recover. To counter this, many institutional-grade strategies shift toward a bucket approach, keeping several years of expenses in low-volatility cash equivalents. Diversification also shifts from high-growth tech or equities into income-producing assets like REITs, high-yield bonds, or dividend aristocrat stocks. The goal is no longer to beat the market, but to ensure the income stream remains uninterrupted regardless of the economic climate. Studies of high net worth individuals show that the most successful crossovers maintain a margin of safety of at least 20%. This means they do not stop working when their passive income equals their expenses, but when it exceeds them by a comfortable buffer. The psychological transition is equally important. Moving from a mindset of earning to a mindset of managing requires a detached, analytical approach to capital. Those who treat their portfolio as a business tend to maintain their crossover status for decades. When the math finally settles and the passive income exceeds the burn rate with a margin for inflation, the individual has achieved something few ever do: the total decoupling of time from money. This is the ultimate objective of the modern capitalist framework. The wealth crossover point is not a matter of luck, but a predictable result of maintaining a gap between what is earned and what is spent, then allowing the surplus to compound. By treating wealth as a mathematical objective rather than a status symbol, the path to independence becomes a sequence of logical steps. If this analysis changed how you think about the relationship between labor and capital, the next video breaks down the specific asset classes that historically produce the most reliable passive income.